Okay, everybody, welcome to the UN CEFACT Global Trust Registry project meeting. For the purpose of the AI transcript, UN CEFACT is spelt UN/CEFACT. Comes up with random stuff every time I look at the transcript. We will be recording the session. I hope that's okay with everybody. There's a transcript that's produced, and the minutes of the meeting are automatically produced. We check those for inaccuracies, like the spelling of UN CEFACT, and correct those, but otherwise they're usually pretty good. A couple of kind of quick intros: code of conduct and intellectual property rules for work with UN CEFACT. Basically, I'll summarize the code of conduct as be nice. Something like that is generally appropriate here. And the other thing is that work we do for UN CEFACT is under intellectual property rights, which basically means they're open source or royalty free for use for anybody. So we're not going to give away kind of trade secrets, then claim them to be ours later on. That's the sort of nature of the game. Today's agenda, we're actually going to add a bit in that Elena's going to talk to in a second. But we're going to talk a little bit about anybody that wants to introduce themselves that's new to the meetings. Very welcome to put your hand up and say hi. Otherwise, I'll let you say hi in the chat for the meeting, and you can sort of type your name in or anything else you want to do. We'll go through a quick recap of the 2 weeks ago meeting, kind of summary of what we discussed and what the results of that discussion was. And then one of the bulks of today's discussion is going to be thinking about how an authoritative registrar directory might actually work. What kind of governance and operations might we need? Harman, yes, you are indeed a new person to the group. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, well, just briefly for people that don't know me, I'm Harman van der Kooi from Fides Labs in the Netherlands. We facilitate all kinds of experiments and ecosystem related to wallets for persons, organizations, and things. And we really like everything that's happening with UNCP. So we've been following it from the start, and actually also now implementing it on a couple of projects. And well, we have one suggestion for a particular pilot for this working group, if that's interesting for the rest of you.
Thank you very much, Harman. Good to have you here. So before I do that, the extra bit of information, Alina, do you want to take the stage, please?
Yes, about the WTO, about the forum.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, hello everybody, good morning, good afternoon. I would like to have a few words because I'm in Geneva at the moment, attending the WTO forum, which took place yesterday and today as well. And yesterday I was attending a few very interesting sessions, also related to our project. And then I had the chance to talk about, to share our project with the audience, and as well as our concerns about the topic. The sessions I was referring to are the following: digital resilience for small economies, managing ESG risks in global value chains digitally, and digital for development, transforming small businesses. Okay, so the main, and as well as making digital public infrastructure successful and sustainable. One of the main concerns of the speakers as well as the audience was, especially in the field of businesses and business registers, is that the title in many cases is still on paper. So the concern was how to create trust in the chain of in the value chains digitally. So I shared our project, the global GTR, and I was explaining them that the trust, even if we digitalize and create or issue new identifiers, the trust end of the day is given by a public authority. In many cases, this public authority in the field of businesses might be a business register. So end of the day, who is issuing the credentials and the identifier And who creates trust is the public authority, even though if we digitalize the whole system, the digitalization by itself does not create or give trust. Of course, we do not. I understand that we do not have the same concerns in Europe as in other countries or continents, as such as African continent or South America, where maybe not all the registers fulfill the same standards. Let's call it somehow, or have the same system. Because some African countries were sharing with us their system and how the trade or business register works, which is does not fulfill the same standard or concept as we do have in many European countries, Australia or others. So this is the main concern that they have. Trust and how to create trust and how does digitalization or AI in general is helping to improve and even to strengthen transparency, trust, and accountability. Okay, so more or less this was the topic of the sessions I was attending.
So Alina, you have obviously been writing our ideas about the requirements, the minimal requirements to be met to be listed in the directory. So what would an authoritative registrar need to be able to do?
Exactly. I was telling them that currently we're working on the minimum set of requirements that a authoritative register has to fulfill in order to be considered as such. Of course, the main one is that it would have to be a public authority created by a government or a government body, and so that it would be recognized as such. Secondly, and here I was explaining them our dual fundamental role of the registers. On one hand, it is the legality check, because we do not only store data, like the public authoritative registers are not, their role is not just to store data or any sort of data. Our fundamental role that we play is this legality check. The legality check, the European Directive 25 and 2025 is also referring to. Legality check means that when we register any deed or public documents, we check that it fulfills the legal requirements and the compliance with the national, with international or European legal frame, for example, with the environmental requirements. So the main role is legality check. And the other role is that when we disclose information, we also somehow fulfill this role of legality check, because we do not disclose any sort of information. We have to verify that the information we disclosure is also complies with, on one hand, the data we store in our database, and of course with the legal frames. So they were also talking about end of the day, who has the custody of the data, because it is all about the data. In the case of the authoritative registers, it's not the thing that we only have custody of data or any sort of data. We also play this main role, and I think that here is the key or the difference between a public authoritative register and any sort of digital platform or public-private institutions that are not a register, because they do not fulfill this role of legality check. And to this requirement also, as I mentioned, refers to Directive 25/2025. Of course, we do understand that not all the registry systems worldwide fulfill the same standards. And as I mentioned a few times, we have to be friendly and open when it comes to creating this directory or Global Trust Registry to all the legal frames from the UN member states. We have to open the gates and understand that not all the countries fulfill, but I still believe that a minimum set of requirements, any sort of register would fulfill to be considered as such. Otherwise, we would open the gate to imagine to a private company or the tech platform, which is not even a government institution. That I still think that we have to work on a minimum set of requirements that an authoritative register would have to fulfill, no matter what the national system or legal frame might be, like a minimum that they have to fulfill.
I think you're right, Alina, and obviously I think you're right, but I think also we've got I shared the link for the draft document we created about these eligibility requirements. And it reminded me, yes, you were telling us how the discussions went yesterday. It's obviously evidently true that the countries have different levels of maturity from a number of different perspectives, but also from a digital record kind of perspective and capability. Yes. So I think it's quite possible that a registrar might be, bound in the created in the legal framework you've described, and they're an authoritative registrar licensed by government under a legal framework and so on. So all these things may be true. They may not have yet got a digital capability, but we can still list them in our registrars that the authoritative registrar for the country of Chad or wherever is this, and they do whatever they do, and they do, well, they don't have a digital capability, but we kind of faithfully record what that registrar is capable of doing, so that someone can't masquerade as the digital authority of Chad that releases things, because that doesn't actually exist, right? So it's sort of, I think it's still useful, and that's where we can accommodate people that are at different levels of maturity, because the directory would just declare, what they can do, and we don't need to sort of insist that they can all release verifiable credentials or whatever else we're doing.
Yes, of course, this is common sense. We cannot pretend that all countries worldwide have a totally digitalized electronic register. This would not be realistic at all.
Is that conference going on today as well?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll. I guess you'll get even more updates from today's sessions when you're.
Yes.
Seeing those. Cool. Very, very good. Shall I move on to the next recap? Yeah. Okay. So 2 weeks ago we were talking about pilots, and I know Herman and others were involved in these conversations and have been in a sense since then. The pilots are a part of the. I got this slide. No, the next slide. This slide here that we're going to talk to in a second. But the pilots, this number 5 area, where we're thinking about how might an authoritative registrar work with participants, and what use cases might we explore, who would like to volunteer, and so on. We generated some content from people that contributed ideas. These are available to everybody. They're actually in this deck as well as on the slides, effectively, and inside the forms. If I press this button, what's going to happen? Okay, we go to that. That's not very useful, is it? If I press that button, oh, that's better. Okay, so for example, this is one of the slides we had on benefits. What might the benefits be for a registrar? We also had some volunteers for sort of pilots to be run, and we had some use case ideas as well. These forms are still available to people. I don't know how to go back quickly. I'm going to go back in a very horrible way. I hope that hasn't given anybody a headache. So those slides are still there. They're in this deck. They're in last week's or 2 weeks ago deck. The forms are still open. You can still put in your ideas about participation, use cases, and benefits. We've got interest from Canada, definitely from Spain. Alina, is that you were 2 weeks ago discussing the sort of the in principle agreement that Spain will be going ahead? Has that had any further development since then?
Not for the moment. As I was telling you, we are looking forward a new board, and for the moment it's still big because we have to approve a budget for this and to assign funds. And
understood.
But definitely the project is approved, as well as the implementation pilot. Excellent.
So Spain's in, obviously. India are also expressing interest. South America with Marcos are expressing interest. So, and I'm obviously trying to stir up the Australians. So we're hopeful that we could have quite a large group. And Harman and others have got some very concrete ideas about how trials might run. So we might even have the Netherlands, if in one way or another, involved as well. So that's very encouraging. We'll carry on that work. We didn't finish the pilots 2 weeks ago and we're done now. We're moving on. That's actually a significant chunk of work to do. Harman, yes?
Yeah, maybe just brief comment. So I did not specifically mention in the Google forum that we actually work with the Dutch Chamber of Commerce and the tax office. So I don't know, maybe you can add it somewhere, but just to be clear, it's kind of formally together with those two. So I think you can really consider the Netherlands as involved.
I'll I guess augment, whatever the right word is, the description, if you like. Yeah, happy to do that. I think you can, if you kept the link, I think you could edit the link still. You the contributor to that response.
Okay.
Can actually sort of, but it's 2 weeks ago. I wouldn't be able to remember where the link was, wherever it got sent. So this week, we're going to be talking about governance and operations. So this is the area on the slide that I'm sort of highlighting in this bright blue color of the sort of deliverables. So this slide, by the way, is this logical model of the whole of the idea of a authoritative registry of a directory of authoritative registrars, which I'm struggling to think of, but I'm trying to say is CARD, the UN CEFACT Authoritative Registry Directory. Kind of makes CARD as a word, more or less. And the sort of numbered blobs around on that screen are to do with the deliverables that we have as a project to create. So what we've been doing for the last 2 weeks is kind of working our way around this map and filling out the space a bit about the topic. So this, the next 2 meetings today and tomorrow, I'm going to be focusing on governance and operation. I'm a fan of an idea called a pre-parade. Now, a pre-parade is an idea that says it's gone brilliantly, whatever project it is you're working on. You're all sitting around drinking your favorite drink or having a fantastic cup of coffee, and there's a ticker tape parade and everyone's celebrating. And you ask yourself, what would have to have happened? What would have to have been done or to be true for us to be so successful at the end of this project? What needs to exist? What needs to be true? So that's a sort of a positive frame of mind. So it's the antithesis, the opposite of the pre-mortem, which is it all didn't work and what went wrong, which is how you flush out risks. So the pre-parade is an idea that sort of says, what do we need to make sure is done? What kind of things would need to exist? So that's the frame of mind I'd like you to have as we're going through this sort of scenario that we've got a global trust registry project that's released a authoritative registry directory, and everyone's extremely happy. It's been brilliant. And we're now focusing on why that's the case. There's a few other instances already in existence of things that are similar to this idea of CARD. There's a few lists on this slide here. We're going to look at a couple of them in some detail. So one of them is the UN CEFACT low code system. Another is the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, or ICAO, depending on how you pronounce your I's, PKD system. And low code is an example of what UN CEFACT maintain of these things they call code list recommendations, or lists of codes, or whatever you want to think of it, but they're basically lists of stuff. And I'll explain a bit more about what LOCO is. These other ones are also very interesting for a whole bunch of other different reasons, and probably all are worthy of conversation, but we've only probably got time for 2, so we can then talk about the lesson. So I'll explain a bit about these, and we're going to go back to Alina with some ideas about sort of how we might think about the things we need to be in place, and then we're going to open the floor with ideas from everybody else. But do interrupt me if there's anything you want to ask. Put your hand up, and I'll hopefully. Do you want to interrupt me? You can always, Alina.
Thank you. No.
Okay, cool. So ICAO, these 2 little squiggly diagrams you see on the page here are, if you go to the ICAO pages about PKD, you'll see that one of the origin stories for them is this idea that if every country in the world wanted to have an agreement with every other country in the world for people that fly to and fro or travel on ships and use passports to enter, then it's a very messy system. The bilateral numbers increase quickly, kind of like an exponential almost. So you've got if you have 8 participants, you end up with 56 agreements. If you have 100 participants, you end up with 4,950. And at the moment, there are 107 countries participating in PKD. So that's a lot of bilateral agreements. So the argument for the ICAO PKD system is that if you just have one place to share the information that you're sharing, which is basically the public key pair, the public key partner to the private key you're using to sign these passports, the NFC chip inside the passport, then that's only one relationship you need to manage. So if you've got 100 countries, we've only got 100 agreements. It's been running very successfully for nearly a decade or more now, and it powers the smart gate type systems you see when you go through airports for a lot of countries, 107 countries. It's got a governance structure that we'll talk about in a second. It's got a quite simple architecture, and it's self-sustaining. And they're expanding the idea of PKD into other areas. They've already got concepts around things like health certificates as part of flying travelers under ICAO's system, but they're all looking at others. We did some deep research into ICAO, which is on the in our folder for the project. These links will take you to that folder and open a sort of 40-page document talking about ICAO. Obviously, you've got the sites themselves, the ICAO sites that talk about what they do. They're quite well written. This is the ICAO kind of governance structure. So ICAO is an agency of the United Nations. It's based in Montreal in Canada. The way it works is the PKD system is sort of described by this MOU, which is 12 pages long, and which is remarkably brief and doesn't have too many hundreds or thousands of pages. There's a few procedural documents that talk about some of the topics that Lena will talk to you later about, dispute resolution, stuff like that. But the basic process is participants, which these countries that are participating will recommend or promote people that'd like to be on the board. They'll go through a process of ballots and they get approved by the agency, and you end up with 15 board members. That board has established an executive body. So it's still like a company, an executive body, which has a chair and a vice chair and some 3 board members from the board and a number of people actually doing kind of advisory work. And they have also created a contract support group. They're the people that negotiate the contract with the company that runs the system that provides this PKD directory, or the PK directory, public key directory. So that's the sort of basic sort of structure. There are fees associated with membership of PKD for countries. I find the fees remarkably good value. So at a country level, each country in the world, to join the system of ICAO, you pay a one-off fee, a registration fee of $15,900 US. And then for each year that you want to be an effective participant, you pay a fee to ICAO of $6,595 at the moment, and operate a portion of $14,000. So about $20,000 US a year to keep a kind of open participation and use of your public key, public domain, and all sorts of goodness around high flow traffic for passengers. It's really kind of, I think, really good value. I was talking to somebody who knows this system extremely well earlier my morning, and they reminded me of a couple of things. This fee is proportional to the number of participants. So if you get more participants, the fee gets lower based on a cost basis that stays reasonably constant. But no matter that it's low at $20,000 US a year, some countries complain that it's too high. And the reason for that can be, if you imagine the value proposition of what ICAO offers is quite significantly dependent on your ability to take value from that system to make it work for you. So if you don't have a sophisticated passport issuing capability, if you can't issue passports with NFCs, well, you don't really want to be an active participant anyway, because you can't play the game. And there's a bunch of other reasons why some countries might find it more expensive than others. Countries like, I don't know, the US and Australia, Spain, probably think this is peanuts, right? This is great value. So anyway, there is a fee, and it sustains the operation of ICAO. UN CEFACT loco, Harman, yes.
Could I just ask one question? So there's 107 participating countries. So more than half of the world is not participating. Could you maybe summarize?
Slightly less than half the world. It's 198 countries or something at the moment, I think. But yeah, so let's say it's about only half the world. So some of the reasons for that are some of the countries of the world don't issue electronic passports. If I look at the Tuvalu, Vanuatu, other Pacific Island nations relatively near me, they don't necessarily issue electronic passports, so they can't play. And there's probably quite a few countries that fit into that space. There's a few countries that might have sanctions, I suppose, that couldn't play. But
that was actually my main question, John. I was wondering, like, I could imagine 2 reasons. One, because you don't actually, you're not digitized enough yet to be actually benefiting from it. But the other one was especially interested, like, could it also really be that some countries don't trust it?
It could be. I don't think that I don't think that's the case now, though. I mean, you can imagine countries that there are tensions with, but those countries tend to all be participants.
Yeah. So, for instance, also Iran, Russia, they're all on this.
Okay, so when you've got so there are UN sanctions against some countries. So North Korea is a sanctioned country. I think Iran might be in a certain areas that might have some sanctions against it at the moment. So yeah, there are countries with sanctions, and those obviously may not be able to participate for other reasons. But that won't obviously explain why it's 107 and not 198, whatever the number is in total nations. But I think the main reason is this digital maturity. You know, and this idea about if you're an island nation like Tuvalu, then how many people actually come in and out of your country a year? That you probably don't have a smart gate passport system anyway, and therefore you can't really benefit from it, right?
But I like the idea what either you or Alina mentioned a bit earlier, that I think in general it would be quite good to really have kind of a register, at least also of all the maybe business registers or something around the world.
Yes, we do have actually. I don't know if you're aware about in the field of property, we have ELRA, which is European Land Registry Association, and in the field of trade, we have the European Business Association, EBRA. But of course, this is only for Europe.
Yep.
And
but I think your point, Harman, is very true. I would actually like to see the directory include countries that aren't digitally enabled yet, but declare who their authoritative registrar is and any mechanism by which you can identify them. You know, they have a website or whatever. It's just something that lets you kind of double check what you're looking at in a shipment order, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Let's look at low code. So low code is this location code, low code, and it's a standard provided by the UN CEFACT and UNECE, part of the United Nations. So it's not a UN kind of initiative. It's a 5-character alphanumeric code. It's got 103,000 locations at the moment. And as an example, AUMEL refers to Melbourne, or rather more specifically, the Port of Melbourne. Its origin was this idea of eliminating ambiguity in where things needed to be shipped to or flown to. So it typically has codes for ports and airports and stuff like that, rather than a postal address or something. So it doesn't go very granular. Obviously, with only 103,000 entries, it doesn't have every destination in the world in there. But it's a very important system because it's on things like shipment records and other things for goods. However, and if there is anybody from low code who runs the system of the UN, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I do think there are known issues with low code in terms of how it's operating on what you can reasonably call legacy IT systems. I think it uses a Microsoft Access database, for example, and they exchange sort of updates through spreadsheets, and it's free, which is generally speaking good news. That tends to be UN kind of policy, although of course ICAO doesn't.
One thing, John, excuse me, talking about Microsoft, I think we do have an expert from Microsoft, and unfortunately he was not able to join today due to the schedule, because in the States, I think it's midnight now, if I'm not mistaken.
You may be on tomorrow.
He told me he will join tomorrow, like on Friday. I don't know what time would be in the States, and if it works for them. Well,
he may well correct I didn't mean to cast aspersions on Microsoft Access as a product, but it's not, generally speaking, a product that you use for enterprise scale global systems.
yes.
And even Microsoft would agree with that. They have other products that you use for those things. This is the best I could do, more or less, with powered by AI and reading through all of the web pages about how the organization structure, governance of low code works. So the UN CEFACT Bureau, sort of Trade and Commerce Bureau for the United Nations, is under the umbrella, is under the effectively the governance of one of the 5 regional commissions, the European Commission, UNECE. Even though UN CEFACT has a global perspective, it's underneath the European region, but that doesn't give it the European view. the recommendation, the most recent recommendation that Alina and I are aware of, and others on this call, is recommendation 49. So recommendation 16, you can imagine, is a few years ago that they wrote recommendation 16. And that described the need for a specification of low code. And that led to the sort of the origin, if you like, story for the low code system. Now what they have is a system where there's a sort of process of data management requests. So this you can download the low code list as a CSV file, as an Excel file, as whatever you want to download it as. There are requests submitted through a portal, a web portal, for changes and updates. Those are reviewed by a number of different parties. There's a sort of distributed model to try and handle the volume of requests they get for changes. There are national focal points, so country-based focal points. So this is a bit like our system. They have countries deciding whether to update or change something. The institutional focal points, so IATA, UPU, and you've got a maintenance team itself that's sort of part of the UN body. You've got an advisory group that comes out of this executive, and every 6 months they update the list. So it's every 6 months. That's not very frequent if I didn't make that too often, right? Too clear. So that's what's happened is that it's the good news is it's freely available. You can freely submit requests to change or make updates. You can download it for free, and many parties rely on low code. But because it's got an infrequent update, and because it's not always completely accurate, which is a concern of areas that are frequently visited and cared about will be accurate. Those that are less frequently visited may not be so accurate, if you see what I mean from a data point of view. It's spawned a whole industry of people that are building capability around low code that actually provide you with real-time API access, that more frequent updates. They double check the data that's in low code, and so they're sort of around the outside that you pay a fee for. So I kind of feel low code's in an interesting space going forward. It might need to take a leaf out of the PKD EKO system and start charging or do something. But it's sort of interesting to see that it seems to be in that current state. So again, if there's somebody who works for the low code group that wants to correct me, I'm very happy to receive a correction on that. But that's sort of the way I'm seeing it. So I'm going to hand over to Alina now, because those are the two case studies. I guess any questions on the case studies, and then Alina's going to help us understand what we might understand from looking at those.
I don't know if anybody has anything to. Okay.
I think you're free to go.
Okay. Hi again. I was, as John was previously saying, we were working together on some governance requirements, and he suggested the governance requirements from ICAO or ICAO PKD, as well as UN low code. And I was studying both, and I had this idea that why not considering a sort of a hybrid system? Anyways, just to mention, these are only ideas, so I encourage everybody to suggest any other governance system or requirements that maybe we did not consider. I was also thinking about SWIFT, or how do they actually work? That can also be an idea. That we would have to do more research on this topic, because it's not easy. The first question we were, and on the next slide we will also discuss the questions, because the first question I was considering is, which body should anchor GDPR policy, authority, and oversight? Would it have to be a United Nations body? Not?
Yep.
So this is the main thing, or the first one that I was considering. Anyways, as I was saying, a hybrid governance approach, from my viewpoint, would be advisable, as considering the United Nations anchored policy and oversight, just to ensure legitimacy, transparency, combined with structured, distributed participation by the member states. And on the next level, maybe technical operation might be internal or UN procured under published SLAs. Of course, this UN anchoring, we were also considering, would it have to be under the UN CEFACT umbrella, or maybe another UN body such as Secretariat, or this is an open question. And of course, we are, as I mentioned, encouraging experts to participate, and maybe they have different ideas, as well as regarding governance requirements. And I was also working on some principles. Of course, this is just, as I mentioned, some of them, and this list is subject to changes. But for me, it's clear that the governance requirements have to fulfill a set of principles, at least from the legal perspective or from my point of view. The first of all that I would suggest, of course, maybe somebody has, or different experts have different ideas or viewpoints, but I would suggest in any case UN anchoring and mandate, such as UN authority, as we were mentioning before. In the second place, separation of roles. As on one hand, we would have the policy or oversight at United Nations, and on the other hand, operations, internal operations at UN procured, just to grant accountability, which is very important from my point of view. We would also consider as a principle inclusiveness, representation, which would be subsidiary, just to encourage the member state participation. Of course, transparency, audit, accountability, as public rules and records, independent audits, sustainability and affordability, as John was referring before to the fees, and especially to certain member states that would consider these fees, considering their income maybe high, can also be an option. As well as data integrity, privacy, and security. Data privacy is a very important principle. We would also have to consider validation and traceability. And of course, interoperability and change management. And last but not the least, proportionate enforcement and redress. Clear obligations, sanctions, which we would also have to consider. Appeals, time-bound dispute resolution. But of course, these are just a few ideas on the principle-based governance. This list is subject to changes, and we are still working on this. I don't know. The next slide.
Yep. Carry on. You kind of introduced the questions.
So now coming back to the questions, how should CEFACT GTR card be governed? This is the first question I was referring to, as I mentioned. Which UN body should anchor global trust registry policy, authority, and oversight? And then what participation model should we adopt? This is also an open question. How should technical operations be organized? Would they rather be operated by United Nations or a UN procured operator? How should we ensure long-term financial sustainability while still preserving access for lower income participants? And here we come back to the fee issues. What baseline assurance mechanisms are required at launch, audit, incident response, dispute resolution? How will interoperability and versioning be managed over time? And of course, these are only just a few questions. When we would start to work and focus more on the governance requirements, for sure, we will have different questions that will arise.
Thank you, Alina. So I guess what we're sharing here, Alina and I, is that we wanted to encourage sort of discussion and thinking about how we might approach this. We probably both feel there are some reasonably obvious answers to some of these questions. Alina's already hinted them, that we, for obvious reasons, believe that it makes sense for the UN in some way or other to be the curator of this directory, and that the decision is then which part of the UN would be the best part to run it. The other there are some other, I guess, questions that seem to beg answers like, well, if it does cost something, then it should cost as little as possible. This kind of like the way I think about it. So we would like minimum viable kind of thing. We don't want to, no one wants to pay the UN a lot of money anymore. And therefore it needs to deliver a lot of value for whatever fees are levied. And I think that's possible here, by the way. I think this could be a very valuable initiative, but it
Yes,
can't.
at the moment I'm working on this set of requirements of the governance, but only like considering the early stage in general terms. Of course, we have to establish a procedure that the member states would have to follow in order to apply for the admission, the GTR, and we have got different stages: admission, and then updates, and then we've got revocation, exclusion, we've got sanctions, and we will share the draft. And then we encourage people to contribute as well and make comments on the suggestion to the document that we will share.
Thank you. So I guess that what I'm suggesting is that we haven't made our minds up. We think we know the direction that we should be traveling in, but we're keen to hear anybody's thoughts on things we haven't thought of asking ourselves about, or ideas about how we should answer some of these questions on the screen, or other questions that should be asked. Anybody got anything you want to raise? Harman.
Well, just maybe commenting on that. I think it's actually really good what I saw so far. I think because it more or less makes sense. It's kind of common sense, because it very much also looks at how similar things are done. So I think it sounds like a very logical basis. And then I think, for instance, literally also doing some pilots in the upcoming months will map this kind of high-level topic to how we do that, right? And then you get to certain details that, of course, need to be agreed upon. And you have maybe a couple of different flavors that you also have to choose. But I think from a high level, to me, it sounds really logical.
Thank you.
John, if you want, I can share briefly the main sections of the draft I was working on.
You should be able to share your screen, or I can pull it up if it's hard to share from where you are.
Okay. No, I can mention them briefly. Of course, I started with the governance principles. Some of them we just mentioned before. Then I was working on an institutional setup. Of course, we were also discussing about it. The United Nations body, preferably within the UNECE, UN CEFACT, shall host the GTR at the requirements. And then, of course, we would need a board. The GTR authorities shall establish a board with the rules of procedure, specifying composition, quorum, voting terms, conflict of interest, safeguards, etc. Secretariat and operator. The secretariat shall support the board, for example, technical and policy working groups. This board might establish expert groups, technical, security, legal policy adoption, just to maintain artifacts and run conformance programs. And then the objects and the data held by the GTR shall maintain a scheme identifier, jurisdiction, legal basis, scheme owner identity, resolve templates, etc. Shall be publicly queryable. And then, of course, I was working, as I mentioned before, on admission and inclusion procedure. Eligibility, the only scheme owners with a public law mandate, as I mentioned as well. A statute regulation intergovernmental instrument to operate our scheme are eligible. National focal points, I was also working on this. Application dossier, of course, applicants shall submit a set of documents which the UN body, whatever that might be, shall verify, such as legal mandate, scope of the scheme, identification of the scheme owner, control of official domain, issuer of deed, etc. And nevertheless, due diligence and conformance, the operator shall conduct documentary checks and technical tests, decision and status, what else? Ongoing obligations, which is also very important, such as accuracy, availability, key and security management, annual attestation, transparency. And then I also mentioned before update and change control procedure. Last but not the least, revocation and exclusion, such as John suggested, delete, revoke, delist. We also have to consider it. And of course, sanctions and appeals. Sanctions and the way to graduate these sanctions, which, for example, could include warning, appeals, of course, fees and the cost sharing. For example, a cost-sharing model may be approved annually by the board and administrated by the GTR authority, and with a fee schedule that, of course, shall be public and proportionate and reviewed periodically. This is subject to changes, and transparency, reporting, data protection, technical policies, conformance, security.
Just to confirm, Alina, that's all. Oh, you're obviously reading through the contents that you have in the document, the topics you're working through. That document, is that already in our delivery folder for the project, so that it's visible to others?
No, because I still work on progress. So.
Okay, cool. So what we'll do for everybody is then when that's ready to be put in the folder and made accessible, we'll send a note out on Groups.io, the email thread we have on Slack, so that you can kind of get an update that it's there to be seen.
Yes, I just wanted to mention a few sections, so just to give people some ideas to work on, and maybe they also make any suggestions regarding any section we might have to add or.
The other thing I think I'm very aware of, and as a few others on this call are aware of, is an initiative from Trust Over IP called to do with the governance frameworks and governance meta models, which is publicly available, and you can sort of use that as a framework from which to define governance for a sort of credential issuing organization. That framework has been used for C2PA. The Adobe and BBC and Sony and a whole bunch of hundreds of other companies' initiative for media certificates, and it's also been used to define the governance framework for the VLI system behind Glyph and Bhutan's digital ID and a few other things. So it's
I
a
was
reasonably
considering it as well. Yeah,
it's a reasonably well tested sort of approach. It's like gives you almost like a checklist of things to think about when we're writing a governance framework. So that's probably going to be part of the mixture for us in terms of where we take good lessons from and build in. So as soon as Alina's ready with that to put into the folder, I know Sankashan's been doing a lot of work this last couple of weeks on helping me kind of get our documents in a state that you can look at them at. The folder, by the way, I think is accessible to all, and I think most of these documents are now viewable. I'll share the link to the folder. You can put your hands up if you can't. Share. I'm not sure if I just did the right thing.
We would also appreciate feedback and comments on the digital identity anchor requirements. I think John shared the document as well. Yeah. Among the experts.
So maybe I'll pull this folder over to show people what we're talking about here. This is the view I get when I look at the folder. These are the documents that we're working on. So you'll see that they've got these numbers like 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So that's this opening up this map that you saw me refer to about the things we're working on inside the project. That's where we get these numbers from, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we're obviously realizing there's some other things we need to work on, that like subsidiary documents or annexes or other things. We've got kind of little work drafts we're working on in other spaces, but the one that I think will go into is document 4 when you've got the rest of that text ready, Alina. Will be improving what currently is inside document 4, which is the beginning of governance procedures for, so these are recommended governance procedures for the UN CEFACT Trust Registry, which I'll now probably go through and clean and call card for the, as a working title. We'll call it card. So that's where you can see Sankarshan's already been helping us with some comments and suggestions about some ideas, but we'll do the same with the others. But I did share a link on the chat for this meeting. I think, let's have a look at what the sharing permissions actually say. Oh, no, general access is restricted. So I think I can do that because I think the files yeah, that'll give you view access. So if you were to click that link that's in the chat now, I think you should be able to access the drive and see the files at least. And I can get updates if people ask to edit a file. I can sort of make a decision. Mostly what I want to do is to give people comment access, so that you can kind of write some comments about suggestions and stuff. If you're a kind of contributor and you're making a whole bunch of changes and it's better to let you run loose, then we'll let you run loose the document, because it's quicker if you enter the ideas yourself. And obviously with each document has change tracking on it, so that any changes can be reversed out and can be traced back to whoever did them and so on. So it's pretty safe. But that's the way we'll work. So that's where all those files are. That's where Alina's document will end up, and that's where all that text will be in the end. And I think if I close that now, I think that was the last. Yeah, that was the last slide for today. So I try and finish these about 10 minutes before the top of the hour, so that gives you time to get to the next meeting. I failed. You've got only 5 minutes before the top of the hour. Sorry about that. I hope it gives you enough time to get on to the next meeting. Thank you very much for participating. Thank you very much, Alina, especially.
Thank you, John. Maybe we can talk a few minutes.
Yeah, I can stay on for a bit. Okay. So I'll actually press close now, and then I'll reconnect with you, Alina.
Okay.
Just so the recording stops. Right?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you very much, everybody. See you on the next one.
Bye.
Bye.